Welcome to Stretch Projects. Today we'll be creating Hangman using JavaScript. So let's set out some requirements. First off, Hangman is a word guessing game, so we're going to need some words. In my build I'll use a word list, which holds a list of existing words rather than trying to generate the words on the fly. Next we're going to need an image we can use to keep track of lives. I will be using a single image here, like a sprite sheet. We will display a list of all of the letters the player has guessed on screen. We won't do anything if the player guessed the same letter multiple times. And finally, we will limit the possible guesses to just alphabetical characters. So the next thing we need to consider is who will use the game and what will they actually want to do. I would expect there to be a player who wants to see some prompt for input. I would expect that player to be able to provide that input, and this cycle would repeat until the word was guessed or the player was out of lives. I'd then expect there to be some sort of feedback about whether the player wins or loses the game. Next we should probably outline what the game will actually do. So the player will open the page containing the game, and the game will immediately select a word from the word list. It will then use that information when rendering the page, and when the page is finished loading, the user will be left with a request to type a letter. The player then obviously has a choice of whether to play or not. But if they do press a key, the first thing the game will do is check whether that input was an alphabetical character or not. If it's not, the game will just ask for another input. If it is, it will add the player's letter to an array containing all of the guesses so far. It will then review the guesses and remove any duplicates. Next up, the game will render the page again. This includes checking the guessed letters with the letters in the target word, so we don't need to do this separately. The game will then review the number of lives the player has, rendering the correct image as part of the process. If the player has no lives left and the word hasn't been guessed, the game will display the loser dialog box. If the player has lives left, the game will check whether there are any more letters to guess. If not, the player has guessed the word in full, and so the win message box is shown. Otherwise it will go back to the start and ask for another input. So now we have a rough outline of what we need to do. If you want to try your hand at this project on your own, feel free to pause the video here. All of the files, assets, diagrams, etc. are all available on the GitHub. Otherwise, let's jump in. Okay, so I've gone ahead and installed XAMPP, which is just a simple web server running Apache. This is just so that I don't have to run it for the actual site from my home directory, for example. And this is what the site's going to look like when we're finished. And here's the HTML to go with that. So a lot of this is actually just styled using Twitter Bootstrap, as you can see. So I'm not going to go through in too much detail. What I will do though is just give a very brief overview. So I've got an assets folder here which contains a JSON word list. These are all of the words that we're going to be guessing from. I've also got an image folder with a sprite PNG, which is the actual image that we're going to be using to represent our lives. I've also gone ahead and included Twitter Bootstrap and jQuery just to make things a little bit easier for us, as well as the associated Twitter Bootstrap theme. So there aren't too many custom classes, but those that do exist for reasons, kind of thing. So I do have this image 0, for example, which is this picture here. This is where our lives are represented. We also have a field here and on here. Obviously this is where the word is displayed, and this is where the guesses are displayed, and this input box is obviously used to input the guesses. So we have previous guesses here, we have target word here, and we also have this input, which is where the players put their guesses. Further on down we also have all of this, and this is just basically a dialog box, a modal, It's just using the Twitter Bootstrap functionality, and we're just going to use that later on to display whether the player wins or loses, and the actual content is populated by JavaScript. So I think the next thing we need to do is to actually create this main.css. We don't have it yet. And all we're going to do in here is to create the associated style for the image. Now the image itself is actually quite a lot wider than what we're going to use. We're going to use 120 pixels here as the width. And this is because we obviously don't want to display every single one of the possible pictures at once. We're going to split it up, and each of these individual things is 120 pixels wide. Also, we're going to set the height. Oops. Which is 164 pixels. We're going to actually load it from memory, or rather from storage. And we're also going to set the offset, or rather the position. This is what we use to actually move across the picture. So for image 0, for example, is offset at 0, 0. Spelling things right is always a good solution. So yes, 0, 0 is the position for the first picture. As I say, each picture is 120 pixels wide, so if we offset that by 120 pixels, we get the next picture. And again, if we offset it another 120 pixels, we get the next one, and so on and so forth. And so what I've done is I've already drafted out this. Now what this is the image 0 is obviously the first picture that loads. And then image 1 is 120 pixels offset, and each of the next ones are also offset by another 120 pixels. This means that we can actually set what the picture is just by using different classes, which we can change through JavaScript later on. And so I think we're pretty much done with the CSS. Okay, so the next thing we're going to do is to create a JavaScript file. Now you'll see we've already imported this as part of the text I already pasted across. And the first thing we're going to do within the JavaScript file is to codify what we've just done within the CSS file. So we're going to be able to change the picture, which is displayed just through some code. And doing that's very, very easy now that we've set up the different classes within the CSS file. All we need to do is to create a new function. Set image number. What we're going to do is we're going to use jQuery to basically remove any attributes, remove any classes attached to this element, and then we're going to attach our own class to it. So if you were considering it, you won't be able to use this code and attach other classes to the image. I mean, it's perfectly possible to not use the remove attribute class and then reset it. You could remove the class, but this way is more bulletproof, if you like. So what we're going to do, we're going to pass in set image 2, for example, and then that's going to remove any classes attached to the Hangman image element, and it's going to add a new class, image 2. So if we look at the actual source code for this, we should be able to now do set image 3. Now we've got the head, the body, and one arm, so that's 3 lives taken off. Set image 0. So all of a sudden we've got that part basically automated. Okay. So the next thing we're going to do, we're going to load the word list. As you can see, I have a word list here. It's basically a JSON file with a load of countries. And so to load this, we're just going to create a function. We're not going to pass any arguments across to this. It's just going to be a one-off event. If you've used jQuery before, you'll probably be familiar with the AJAX requests. And so we just need to pass in the URL. Now we don't actually want this to be asynchronous. We want, if we're not able to load the word list, there's no point continuing with the game. And so we're going to turn asynchronous off. And then when it's done loading it, we're basically just going to put all of this information into a global variable so that we're able to access it throughout the rest of the program. And we're just going to set this to JSON. Now the reason I'm using this for loop here is because I don't necessarily trust the information here. So for example, if this was a proper array, it should start at 0. But it's only the actual name of the country that we're interested in anyway. And so by creating our own array, we basically just sidestep that problem entirely. And I say we want this word list to be a global variable. So now it's a global variable. And we can test this which by going into here. And all of a sudden we've got all of our names. So the next thing we need to do is to actually pick one of those names at random. And so we just need to create another function to do that for us. So we're not actually going to pass any variables into this, we're just going to return, we're going to set a new variable up here, a global variable called target word. And this is obviously going to be the target for the player to guess. Now to get a proper random number, we're going to just use math.random. But if you've used this before, you'll know that this will return a number in a range of 0 to less than 1. It will never return 1 itself. So we're going to just multiply this by the length of the word list. So now it will return a number between 0 and 1, and then that will be applied to the length of the word list. So if we have 100 words, it will now be applied to the range 0 to 100, or 0 to 99 rather, because it never actually reaches 1, it will never actually reach 100. And just as almost a assurance, I'm just going to round this down to the nearest whole number. So this way we're guaranteed to get a whole number as in an integer, and we're never actually going to go beyond the length of the word list. So we're not going to run into any buffer overflow errors or things like that. So the next thing we're going to do is to actually draw the word on screen. So we just create another function called draw word. Now this part we're going to actually check whether the current target word is null, and if it is, we're going to create a new word. And then we're just going to set the value of this field here. Can't really see it. There's a field there that we're going to set the value of to actually display what our random word is. And so now if we reload this, if we get our word list and then try to draw our word, it will do it for us. We don't need to particularly go out of our way to set a new word. This way we can just set the target word to null, and then next time the program tries to operate, it will generate a new word for us. Now we're going to do a similar thing for the guesses. So we're going to create another function called draw guesses. And we haven't done it yet, but we're going to create another array called guesses. Later on we'll be populating this array with our actual guesses, but when we're actually outputting it, we're going to want to first sort that array to make sure it's in alphabetical order. So the first thing we do, guess.sort, and that will put it into alphabetical order for us. And then it's just a matter of previous guesses. And we're just going to set this, we're going to do a join here and comma separated. So if we refresh this, if we then push a few variables into our guesses element, and then we try to draw our guesses, they appear properly. I mean, even if we did these out of order, we know that because we put that sort in there, it will generate it properly, and we don't need to worry about what's actually in this cell either, because we're just going to overwrite the HTML within the tag. Now I think it's time for a bit of automation. We've done a lot of this so far where we're typing into the console. We wouldn't want to do that in the end result, so we can put some automation in right now to help us as we're going along. So when the document's ready, we're going to perform some actions. So very simple, just going to run an anonymous function. I'm going to load the word list. And we're going to draw the words, as well as drawing the guesses. Now when it's first loaded, there won't be anything to draw as far as the guesses is concerned, but it will draw the word for us. So for example, that time it was France, that time it was Swaziland. And so that basically concludes the first section, where we wanted to show our use and input. We've found a word from a word list, and we've displayed that word on the page, and we're at the point now of asking the player for input so that they can guess what the word is. At this point, it's probably also useful if we were to go ahead and create a reset function. Now all we're going to do here is reset all of the values to their current values, so that later on we don't need to worry about what the current values are. We can just forcibly reset everything for us. So set image to 0. Set the target word to null. Guesses to an empty array. Because we've already done it, we may as well create a new word here. This means that whenever we want to, from now on, all we need to do is call reset game, and it should reset everything for us. So the next thing we need to do is to actually take the guess from the player. So at the moment, there's nothing. The player can type anything into this. It's limited to one character because of the HTML, but nothing actually happens when they do type into here. So the next thing we're going to do is to actually add guesses to our array. At the moment, this never gets populated. So if we create a new function, what we're going to do is we're going to take the value directly from the element itself rather than passing the value around. It may be better practice to do that, but in this case we're going to access it directly. So the first thing we're going to do is actually check whether the input is an alphabetical character, whether it's A through Z. We're also going to check whether it's either upper or lowercase, but we're also going to check that the input is not a null value. It's possible when interacting with input boxes like this that if you wanted to alt tab, for example, a very strange character to be passed across to the JavaScript, and we obviously don't want to put that character into our array. We only want alphabetical characters. So we're going to filter these out by both a type test as well as some regular expression testing. So first off, the regular expression. So if it starts A to Z, or this basically means if the starting letter is A to Z, or if the ending letter is A to Z, they're both going to be the same letter, but it gives us that extra assurance. I'm just going to test, and the value that we're going to test is the guess. And the other type of test that we're going to do is a typo of test. So we're going to look at the guess again. And we're going to check that it's not equal to undefined. So if it passes this test, we know that it is an alphabetical character, and so in that case we're going to push it into the guesses array. So that's just done by guesses.push. And we're also just going to convert it to lowercase. Basically later on we want to avoid as much testing as possible. It's unnecessary, and so if we just put everything into lowercase here, we just have to convert the target word into lowercase later when we're comparing against that, rather than doing it on a continual basis. So now that we've added the guess, we want to actually perform another function on the array called clean guess. Now this is basically just about removing any duplicates from the array. We don't want to punish the players for putting the same letter in twice, and so if we remove the duplicates, we'll be able to avoid that problem altogether. So what we're going to do is we're going to cycle through each guess. Perform the function. So for each element in the array, we're just going to test whether the length is greater than 0. So obviously remove any duplicates again, which is passed by the first test. And we're also going to compare against the letters that are in the array already. So we're going to do this by creating a new temporary element here, or temporary variable, sorry, called unique guesses. And what we're going to do is we're going to go through this, and for each element we're going to first check if it's already in unique guesses. If not, we'll move it across to unique guesses. If it is in there, we'll just skip it. And so we'll do this through another test. So if the element is not empty and we're going to test if it's in the array. So we're going to see if it's in there, and if the result is -1, we know that it's not in there. So if it is in there, we will receive a number telling us which index it is in that array. And so we know at this point that it's not in the unique guesses array, and so we just push it in there. And then we obviously want to overwrite our current guesses with the unique guesses, and so we just overwrite it. And so now we know that nothing in that array is duplicated, and we should be able to test that now. So we typed R. So now all we need to do is add the guess. Now we need to draw guesses. So as you can see, they're getting added in properly now. If we left that as E and tried to add it again, you see we've not called clean guess yet. But now that we've cleaned it, we know that that duplicate is gone. And so the next thing I think we should do is to automate this part, the typing of the functions. We don't want to keep on typing everything each time. We want to test it or eventually play the game. And so what we'll do is we'll create a new function called update, and we'll bind that function to the onKeyUp event for this input field. And within this updated event, we will start to add in all of the functionality that we've been typing in. So the first one is to add the guess. We then want to clean the guess. We then want to draw the word and draw the guesses. I think the next thing we need to do is to start looking at the live system. So because we have 7 images, we know that we have a maximum of 6 lives, so we can declare that up here. Because the first one is there's no lives taken, and then on the 7th life that's the end of the game, and we're going to go 0 through to 6. So the review lives logic, if you like, we'll need another function. And we're going to calculate the number of lives left every time the player inputs a new letter, rather than storing it in memory. So initially the lives remaining will be the max lives, and for the purpose of this function we're also going to copy across the target word. We're going to copy that into a variable called string. We're going to put this into lowercase as well, so that it's easier for us to compare throughout this function. So the next thing we need to do is we're going to look through all of the guesses that we've made, and for each guess we're going to see whether that letter is in the target word. So we're just going to use a for loop to do that for us. And for, as I say, for every guess we're going to check whether it's in the string or the target word, and so we do that through an if statement. So if the result of this is -1, i.e. it's not in the string, then we're going to lose a life, so lives remaining. Now, because of the way we've coded this, we need to put some sort of floor on this function, otherwise it's technically possible that you can have -12 lives, or minus anything lives. We obviously don't have pictures to represent that, and so I'm just going to put a hard floor of 0 lives left. So in the case that lives remaining does equal or go below 0, we're just going to set the image to 0. Which is this picture. Next we're going to show an end game dialog. We've not coded this yet, but we will do in a moment. I'll come back to that. So next off we just want to return. In that case, we don't want to continue processing this function. In every other case though, we do want to show the picture based on how many lives the player does have left. And so just taking the max lives from, taking the lives remaining from the max lives, will return that result for us. So now onto this endgame dialog box. Within the HTML we have this at the bottom here. So what we're going to want to do is we're going to want to set the title of this to either you've won or you've lost. We're also going to want to set the content, the actual body of the text, so that we can actually give the player a message. Now, the way I'm coding this, we're going to use the same function for win or lose. And so we're going to add a parameter here, is winner. That will either be true or false, and that will determine obviously which message is shown. So if the player is a winner, we're going to set the value oh sorry, I set the HTML of the in-game. That's this one here. And set the value of this. And again, we're just going to overwrite the HTML here. And we're just going to say U1. I'm going to do the same again here with the actual body. But we're going to give a different message. So, I don't know, you guessed. Target word in so that will just pull the number of total guesses from the guesses array. Now we're going to do the same again if the player loses. No, we don't need the guesses for losing because there's obviously only so many lives that they can take. Let's be kind. So at the moment we've only set the HTML of these two elements. We've not actually displayed the modal yet. And we do that very easily. Oops, what's that? So we do that just by toggling the modal. So now if we type a letter, if we clean guesses, clean guess. So now we should be able to type in-game dialog, either true or false. And we obviously want to add that into our we want to review this first. So in this case, the player's lost. Now we're not going to do anything else here. We just wanted to fix that part so that obviously the message box will appear for people in that scenario. So we should be more or less finished here. If I type a guess, we need to reset this next. And to do that, it's quite easy. We just need to set its value to an empty string. Now, once we've added the guess, that's probably the best time to do that, because we obviously don't need the value of that anymore after that point. So we just set the value to an empty string. Let's try that. Okay, so the next thing we need to do is to update the image based on our input. And to do that we just need to update our update function. So we've just created our review lives function. So this is obviously working properly. It didn't, however, pick up on the fact that we typed every letter within the word. And that's because we're still missing one key component. Well, two really. I think the biggest problem here at the moment is the fact that it's still showing actual letters. You wouldn't want to give someone actual letters and say guess this word, because it's pretty obvious which letters are within it. So I think the next thing we need to do is obfuscate that word. And so what we're going to do here is we're going to take Ireland in this case, and we're going to filter through each of the words that each of the letters that we've guessed. If the letter is within this word, we're going to show that letter within that word in the correct place. If we haven't guessed a word within the target word, we're going to show an underscore, or you can show whichever character you like. And so to do that, I'm going to create a temporary variable here called obword. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to treat our target word as an array. I'm going to loop through each of the letters within the target word and compare them with the guesses that we've already made. So as I say, we're going to go through all of the letters within that array and compare. So if so I'm going to use lowercase here again just to make the comparison easier, because we've obviously already converted all of the guesses into lowercase. So in this scenario we know that the letter is not in the target word, or the target word letter is not being guessed, and so we're just going to append an underscore to our obfuscated word. Otherwise, we know that in this scenario here, we know that the player has, the player has guessed the letter, and so we're just going to append the actual letter. And then we're just going to return that. So this is going to take our target words and it's going to give us a list of letters. Let's actually try it out. Yeah, so we've got this list of underscores here. It does, however, progress as we add letters. And so what we're going to do here is just going to take this obfuscated word and we're going to display that in the place of the target word here in the draw word function. So now we have a list of underscores. And I lost that. So then the final thing that we need to do is to actually check if we've won. Because so far we've only identified if we've lost. And so to do that, all we need to do is add another function, very small function. Because we know that the obfuscated word, which is returned by this variable or this function, will contain an underscore if it's not correct, we're able to just compare the two. So if that does return the same letter or the same word as the target word, we know that we've guessed all of the letters. So we just need to display the endgame dialog. And of course we need to add that into our update function, which we call every single time. Would help if I put obfuscate words and not obfuscated. And so now you can see that we've won. So hopefully this tutorial has been some use to you. As you can see, we've created an entire game in around an hour using JavaScript, HTML, CSS in ways that you may not have necessarily thought to use them. If you have any feedback or suggestions about this project, please leave them in the comments below. Also, do remember that all of the code is available on GitHub if you do want a copy. Until next time.